Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. So in this episode of the DIY scrapwood shed build, I'm going to be making the framing for the shed. So as you know, I want to build this shed basically out of three materials. So I've got all my long pieces of wood stored up the top in my workshop, and I'm going to use anything I can here, anything that's at least 2 centimeters thick. I'm going to be able to get some framing out of. As you can see, I've got a real mixed bag of materials. Hopefully I can make use of all of this. And this is all wood that I found thrown out. This piece is a little bit too long, so I just needed to cut that one down. Here is my framing dimensions, 3 centimeters by 2 centimeters, which is quite small, but that will allow me to get the most out of the material because I need quite a lot of framing. And it is only a 6x4 shed, so it should be just fine. So I started off by ripping all the wood in one dimension, and then later on I ripped it all again in the other dimension to get 3 centimeters by 2 centimeters. If you've got more wood available, I'd recommend to make the framing bigger. This is as small as I wanted to go, although sheds that you buy, cheap sheds that you buy, have probably got even smaller framing than this. Even though this was wood that was thrown away, scrap wood, it is good wood. There's nothing wrong with it. So this took quite a while to do, and by the end of it all the blade was completely blunt, so I had to change my blade. Some of the wood was quite thick, so I had to raise up the blade to get through it. If you were to buy all of this framing, it would be quite expensive. So I really do think this is worth doing if you can find the scrap wood. So now I've got all the wood ripped in one dimension, I can move the fence over and then go again to get the final 2x3 centimetre. I've got a selection of short pieces and long pieces. The long pieces for the uprights and the short pieces will be for the noggins. And as you can see, there's the final dimensions. And after that, there was a lot of sawdust to clear up. So now I just needed to get all of the framing and some more pallet wood up to my dad's house. Here it is at my dad's house, ready to work with. So here are the designs that I did for the front, rear and the 2 side frames. So I'll be starting off with the side frames. As you can see, they're square at the top, but I do add a slope later on for the roof. Very simple design. Using the base as a reference, I could start to make the side frames, just marking up the length. Once I'd cut one piece, I used that as a template to cut the next piece for the top and bottom. And the screws are going to be these self-tapping screws. Don't have to drill pilot holes, which makes everything easier. I'm only using one screw per joint. That just makes everything easier because the wood is not too big. There isn't really room for two screws. But when the cladding's on, everything will keep locked together anyway. So now to add the noggings. I just worked out an equal spacing here. It doesn't have to be too accurate because this isn't a huge shed. It is only a small garden shed. But they are equally spaced from each other. And I just used the amount that looked right to me. And I'm also trying to use as little material as possible. It always helps if you've already got the base to build the framing off. It acts as a platform. Unfortunately, a 6x4 platform isn't very big because this is going to be quite a tall shed, so it's not the easiest base to work off. So these frames are actually taller than the width of the base. Now for the noggins, I went through the centre and then I staggered the noggins so that it was easier to get the screws in, so that way I don't have to toenail any screws. So once the first side was made, I could use that as a template to make the second side. And I just repeated the process again. So now for the slope on the sides for the roof, I've got a piece of the framing there and I'm just working out how I want my slope to be, and then I can mark the wood. I thought this was the easiest way to do it. Then with a pull saw I could cut those lines, those angles. And then I could add one more piece of framing to the top to create that slope pitched roof. And the final thing then to do is to cut off the excess. So I can just offer up another straight edge and then cut flush. Then I added a final support block in the centre. So here are the two side frames. We've got the noggins here, making everything nice and rigid. And then towards the top, I've added this slope, put a centre support in, locks everything in position. So it's going to be 2 meters at the highest point, going down to 1.9 meters at the other end. Now I need to work on the back panel. So now moving on to the rear frame. Nice simple frame, square, very similar to the sides, but there's no slope. This is the probably simplest frame of all. So I repeated the process just like on the sides, marking up the pieces, the uprights ready to cut. It's really handy to have a speed square when you're building a shed. I just needed to do a quick bit of maths to work out the equal spacing for the uprights, and then I could just mark up where they're going to go. Usually when you're building a frame, you can use the tape measure itself to get the reference points. I think it's 16 on centre, it's already on the tape measure. But because this is a small shed, it's really not necessary. Again, I'm using those self-tapping screws. And at this point the frames are not super strong, but they will be once they're all locked together and the cladding goes on. And again I just staggered the noggins across the centre of the frame. You could add more wood if you want, if you've got more wood, but I just wanted to use the bare minimum, and there is the back frame all done. So now onto the front frame. This is my basic design. There's a window and a door in this one. So again, I made a box, top, bottom and two sides, and then I could start filling it in. Again, it doesn't need to be super accurate with the spacing of all the noggins, as long as they are equally distanced to each other and it looks like there's enough of them. For a small shed it should be just fine. So I've got a small offcut I'm using here as a spacer to get equal spacing. Just helps to keep everything accurate. And then for the window that I built in a previous video, I could just work around it by adding it in and then adding the framing. If you're using thin wood like this or small timber, you have to be careful of warping and twisting. It's very prone to that, this wood, so it's always helpful to measure everything when you're putting the frame together, because it can take some of that warping and twisting out of the wood by pulling it all in shape. So that was the last piece going in, and that is the front frame all done. Okay, so that is about it for this video. So framing done. In the next video I'll be cladding the shed, adding the doors and windows. So I hope you join me for that one. If you like the video, please remember to like and also consider subscribing for more DIY related videos. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.